So last year, for the first time in the history of my channel, when I did my extended video on the editing and Suicide Squad, I indulged in the well-worn trope where a reviewer plays up needing drugs or alcohol to get through the process. Now, in the script it was supposed to be cooking oil as a total subversion of the trope, but at the last minute I decided to just use an old cough syrup bottle instead, so I wound up inadvertently just recreating the trope in its entirety in an attempt at being witty. Anyway, let's talk about the art of storytelling in the Book of Henry. I'm going to warn you, the Book of Henry is an infectious movie. There's a decent risk that knowing about this movie will make you insufferable to your friends and family as you insist on recounting every mind-numbing twist in excruciating detail. The Book of Henry is a case study in what happens when you spend 20 years writing and rewriting the same script. Crime novelist Stephen Horowitz originally started shopping the script around in the mid-90s. It got some buzz and made the rounds, but ultimately wasn't produced. Horowitz held on to it and kept making changes as the years passed, and he grew older.
I wrote the first draft of this 18 years ago, so it's almost like I grew up with this story in my head. In a weird way, it has all my enthusiasm and energy of youth, and then along the years I've rewritten it. So things that I've learned along the way I've been able to bring to it.
It's no wonder then that the film is something of a cross-section of 2 decades of cloying children's films and films about children, from Little Man Tate and Radio Flyer through Pay It Forward to Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. The end product is, from a critical perspective, like a Sudoku puzzle. The failings and poor decisions are interlinked in a way that explaining one requires understanding the relative construction of the others. There is not a singular problem, but a complex system of codependent problems that are ultimately rooted in the insurmountable flaw that is the movie's basic premise. This is a movie about a mother, Susan, who sets out to murder her neighbor Glenn and kidnap his stepdaughter Christina, following instructions left behind by her genius son Henry, who just died of brain cancer. Or it's about Henry, a kid genius who decides to kill his neighbor Glenn, but develops terminal brain cancer and spends his final days preparing meticulous instructions so his mother, Susan, can carry out the murder and kidnapping after his death. But it's also a heartwarming, life-affirming reminder that cynicism weighs us down and we should be doers, not dreamers, and we should murder our neighbors, but only if their kids are sad, because as we all know, a sad teenager is an abused teenager. So to start this off properly, I'm going to try as best I can to simply, factually recount the plot of the film without commentary, questions, or asides. Alright? Let's go. Henry and his younger brother Peter get on the bus while Henry, in voiceover, waxes philosophic about the nature of man, suggesting that sometimes people will surprise you while the rest of the time people are exactly who they seem to be, which is to say, cruel. In class, Henry improvises his essay project in front of the class, mocks another student, and tells his teacher that he shouldn't be in an advanced class because
it's better for my psychosocial development for me to interact with the peer group at a normal school environment. Oh, yeah.
While waiting after school, Henry buys and sells stocks over the payphone until Mom, Susan, pulls up in a beat-up car. Henry tells her she should buy a new car because they can afford a new car, but Mom says,
There's nothing wrong with the old car.
At home, Peter bugs Henry over the radio until Henry agrees to let Peter help him with his Rube Goldberg machine.
It's all about timing, setup, covering every contingency.
That night, Susan puts Peter into the bath and then plays video games while Henry does the family finances, telling Mom that she needs to pay more attention. At bedtime, Susan reads the 2 boys a story that she wrote. She finds an engineering award that Henry won, and Henry gives the medal to Peter. At breakfast the next morning, Henry continues to bug Mom about the finances, trying to teach her how to use the computer, and the kids correct her middle finger posture when she flips Henry off. They're called outside by their neighbor, Glenn Sickelman, the police commissioner, who complains about the leaves on their lawn, and Susan dotes on the neighbor girl, Christina. At work, Susan banters with her coworker, Sheila. Her boss, John, gives her her paycheck, suggests that she sets up direct deposit, and Susan says she'll need to check with Henry.
You have to ask your 11-year-old?
12. He's almost 12.
At school, Henry asks Christina how she's doing, and Peter gets beat up. The medal that Henry gave Peter gets broken. Back home, Peter sulks. Henry cheers him up by doing This? Then Susan comes home with Sheila and the two get drunk. Henry wakes up with a headache, spies on Christina next door, and ominous music tells us something is up with Glenn. The next morning, Susan drives the kids and Christina to school. Henry keeps looking at her on the ride to school and in class, and then he gets up, storms into the principal's office and says,
God damn it, Janice, how much longer does this have to go on?
They argue about Christina being abused by Glenn. God damn it, Janice tells him she needs conclusive evidence, and Henry says he'll handle it alone. The kids get picked up by Susan after school, and they stop by Sheila's. Then they get groceries and see a dude beating on his girlfriend. Henry wants to get involved, but Susan tells him to mind his own business. Back home, Henry calls Child Protective Services on Glenn. Then, while everyone is unpacking groceries, Christina puts a lot of weighty emphasis on the fact that Glenn is her
stepfather.
Susan agrees to drive Christina to and from the upcoming talent show because Glenn isn't planning on going. Susan tells Henry to be less serious. Henry says that he should have gotten involved in the supermarket and that violence isn't the worst thing. CPS checks on Glenn and Christina, but the head of CPS, Twist, is Glenn's brother, so Henry starts driving around town on his bike, making notes in a red notebook, buys books on crime scene investigation, and scouts out a gun store where he overhears some dude trying to buy an illegal gun by dropping the name Dominic.
What if Dominic sent me?
Be 1100.
Back home, Susan is playing Gears of War, and Henry tells her to shut it off. At bedtime, there's an argument about who's enchilada number 1 and who is enchilada number 2.
How come he gets to be enchilada number 1?
Then Susan sings them a song. In the middle of the night, Susan is woken up by Peter screaming because Henry is having a seizure. He's rushed to hospital, it's incurable brain cancer, and Henry explains his own disease to the neurosurgeon.
It's gotta be a high-grade ependoma or glioblastoma.
Sheila visits Henry in the hospital and kisses him. Henry and Susan argue about the finances. Henry tells Peter to make Mom read his red notebook after he's gone. Henry and Susan argue about the finances again. Then Henry dies in the middle of the night. A few days later, Peter comes home. Susan is making brownies for dinner, and Dr. Hottie comes by for a house call where he gives Peter his cell number. At work, Susan is losing her mind. John sends her home, but first tells her that Henry told him via letter that she has $680,000 in a checking account and even more in stocks and bonds. At home, Peter finds Henry's red notebook, which...
I think Henry wants us to kill Glenn.
Mr. Sickleman?
Susan argues with the book, calls CPS herself, spies on Glenn, and then is told by the book to check the safe where she finds tapes and a Walkman. The tapes walk her step by step through withdrawing money from the bank, avoiding security cameras at the gun store, and buying...
I need a Nemesis Vanquish 7.62 with a Litton Ranger, night vision scope, a suppressor, and 3 extra 10-round detachable mags. Let's see what Dominic has to say about that, huh?
Susan then gets a copy of Glenn's signature, which she uses as per the tape's instructions to forge custody papers for Christina. At the talent show, Dr. Hottie shows up because Peter invited him. Once the show starts, Susan synchronizes her watch, jumps into her new car that Henry bought, drives back to the tree fort, and sets up to take the shot. While she's aiming, back at the talent show, Christina dances a sad dance, and goddammit, Janice, seeing the sad dance, goes and makes a phone call. Back at the treehouse, Susan has a brief moment where she realizes that, holy crap, she's taking instructions from a tape recorded by her dead 11-year-old and decides not to shoot the police commissioner in the head with a sniper rifle. Standing ovation. There's your big Kuleshov effect moment for the movie, by the way. Glenn confronts her.
What the hell is going on here?
She threatens him, jumps in her car to get back to the talent show. Glenn goes home, makes a phone call, and shoots himself in the head. Susan gets back just in time for Peter's magic act, where he summons the spirit of Henry from his trunk in the form of a fake snowstorm. Christina learns her stepfather is dead. The court gives custody to Susan based off of her falsified documents. Susan burns all evidence of her crimes, and then the movie ends with Susan tucking enchilada number 1 and butterfly number 1 into bed. Credits roll.
For you, I thought I'd lost.
Let's just say I had the benefit of being born into a bull market.
This might seem like an odd point to start the actual autopsy with, but let's talk about the money issues in the film. In the middle of the movie, after Henry dies, Susan's boss John gives her an envelope, a letter from Henry that says she has $680,000 in the bank and even more in stocks and bonds. They're rich! Henry has, from beyond the grave, saved the family from poverty. No more will Mom be forced to miss bedtime because she's working late. She can now realize her true passion to be a children's picture book author. This is a genre touchstone. These sorts of movies about exceptional kids almost always have some element of overcoming or just dealing with financial difficulty, often poverty. Little Man Tate, Radio Flyer, and Pay It Forward all hit this beat in one way or another. Single mom raising 1 or 2 kids at the edge of financial ruin, working at a diner, driving a beat-up car, joking with her coworkers about the hardships of being rich. Here's the problem. The family in the Book of Henry is doing fine. They're fine. They're fine. They're fine. They're fine. Earlier in the film, John explicitly points out that they live in a nice neighborhood.
It's a nice neighborhood you live in. So I figured you for an apartment somewhere.
I mean, heck, they live right next door to the police commissioner. Henry buys and sells stocks over the phone. Susan only seems to work part-time, and it's never a worry about how they'll pay the bills. Henry has brain surgery, and no one is concerned with how they're going to pay for it. Hell, our first introduction to Susan is contextualized by money.
I really wish you get a new car. It's not like you can't afford it or anything.
That isn't the point. And besides,
There's nothing
wrong with the old car.
These beats come up several times where Henry explicitly points out that they can afford stuff, and she never disagrees. In fact, the opposite. She chides him and says that being able to afford it isn't the point.
It's not like you can't afford it or anything.
That isn't the point.
He also tells Susan that she can afford to quit her job at the diner and focus on writing. He's constantly telling her to pay attention to the financial statements and investment reports and bank statements, but the reveal that they have all this money doesn't really mean anything from a story standpoint. This scene at the diner works just as well if that line is cut, because the actually important line is this.
What? I'm fine.
No. Oh, you're not fine.
Hell, if anything, the scene accidentally implies that she was pretending to be in a paycheck-to-paycheck situation, and that Henry has outed her wealth to her friends and coworkers, humiliating her. Now, the fact that the family isn't living in poverty isn't itself a problem. Just because it's a staple of the genre doesn't make it mandatory. We don't need that for it to be effective or complete. But as you can see from all these examples, the issue of money comes up often and explicitly. It's not an unstated dimension or just a background detail. The weird thing is that it actively works against the theme of the film. Now, this is a rare film that opens with a thesis statement. Henry's improvised essay in front of the class is a direct philosophical statement aimed at the audience, and in Henry's little Tyler Durden Jr. screed, he explicitly denounces the exact sort of obsession over money that he then spends the rest of his life pursuing.
Our legacy isn't what we write on a resume or how many commas we have in our bank account.
70? And you know what? Give me 10 Liftcom with the limit at 2 1/4. Let's just say I had the benefit of being born into a bull market.
I really wish you get a new car. It's not like you can't afford it or anything.
That isn't the point.
Did our financial statement come in the mail today? Really read it. Know what it says. Mom, I told you don't have to work anymore. Show me what I just taught you.
I'm not a child, Henry.
Show me. I need you to bring in the financial files.
Oh, don't you worry
They're
about
in the
it.
second file drawer in my cabinet.
Not now.
I also need to get a hold of the retirement statement.
Let's talk about it next week.
And if Liftcom gets above 200, dump it. You need to buy a new car already.
There's nothing wrong with the old car.
Put you in some long-term bonds, triple tax-free.
He says you have like $680K in a checking account, even more in stocks and bonds.
It's a bad movie.
It's all about timing, setup, covering every contingency.
Henry's plan is bad and stupid. It's exactly the kind of bad and stupid Rube Goldberg Looney Tunes assassination plan that you'd expect to be cooked up by a dumb 11-year-old. Now that in and of itself could be something fun and interesting if it weren't offensively paired with the incredibly heavy subject of rescuing someone from being raped, and the fact that an adult follows the plan almost to its completion before having a minor epiphany that maybe murder isn't actually the answer. This is all paralleled by constant assertions that Henry is, in fact, a super mega genius who thinks of everything. So for fun, let's point out all the flaws in this flawless plan. From the start, I need to emphasize that this is a plan to kill Glenn. It's also theoretically a plan to rescue Christina from abuse, but first and foremost, it's a plan to kill Glenn. We'll talk about this in more detail later, but so little of the plan revolves around or involves Christina that really rescuing Christina is just the justification for a plot to kill Glenn. You could swap the motive for anything else, and very, very little would change. The first thing to highlight is that most of this plan is drafted before Henry knows he's going to die, meaning that he was, in concept at least, intending to somehow follow through with these steps. This is a big screenwriting problem because the writer already knows Henry dies before the character knows. So the plan is accidentally built around the convenience that Henry doesn't need to execute the plan. Now, a lot of the smaller details of the plan are suggested as part of various preparation montages and illustrations from Henry's notebook, which we fortunately get in close-ups during the opening credits. Now, despite all the attention given to minute details like the type of bullet used and clearing all the branches, the basic concept of the plan is really simple. Get a gun, lure Glenn out into the woods, and shoot him in the head from the comfort of the playhouse. After that, as per the illustration, the body falls into the river, and then the gun gets thrown off the bridge into the lake. The biggest hole here is that every version of the plan revolves around shooting Glenn. Henry explicitly scopes out the gun store and gets the name Dominique at a point when he just assumes the headaches are stress. Except if we take the cancer out of the equation, this is where the plan ends, because even with the whole Dominic thing, even the gun store owner willing to bend the paperwork rules for cash isn't going to sell a sniper rifle to an 11-year-old. The next biggest hole is the body. Again, the scriptwriter knows that neither Henry nor Susan will actually kill Glenn, so they don't bother to sweat the details, which leaves us with Henry intending for Glenn's body to fall into the river, and by river, I mean creek. This creek. Now, to me, someone who watches way too many police procedurals, this isn't so much a hide-a-body creek as much as it's a, hey boss, we found a body down by the creek. So Henry's master plan to kill Glenn is really just kill him in your own backyard and hope no one suspects his neighbors. Once we move away from the concept into the weeds of the details is when the plan really falls apart into needless complexity. The hilarious thing is that Henry repeatedly stresses the need to plan for every contingency, but then fails to plan for even basic contingencies.
Everything has to be timed to the second. Every movement, every angle, every footstep. There's no room for error.
The most glaring hole is in step 1, lure Glenn out into the woods. Apparently the best idea the authors could come up with was making noise with a walkie-talkie strapped to an amplifier. Seriously, that's the plan. Susan whistles into a walkie-talkie, and this noise is suspicious enough that Glenn gets his gun before going to investigate. It also needs to be stressed here that everything in the details of the plan hinge on a very tight schedule, as Susan needs to be seen at the talent show, get home, kill Glenn, dispose of the evidence, and get back before anyone notices that she's gone. So plan for every contingency, but the whole thing falls apart if Glenn watches a movie, gets a phone call, takes a shower, or does literally anything that would prevent or delay hearing the noise that's supposed to lure him out into the woods to his death. Another great problem with the plan is that Henry, via tape, has Susan run around to a bunch of different ATMs to withdraw a few $100s in cash at each. He says that this is to avoid suspicion and get around withdrawal limits, but hitting up a bunch of different ATMs in a short span of time is exactly the kind of behavior that's going to draw suspicion. Also, Susan, you're rich. You have well over $1 million in investments in cash. Just go to the bank and take out the money like a normal person. It's not even that much. She only takes out $1,500, which is 1, not enough to buy the hardware she gets from the gun store, and 2, not a suspicious amount of money. That's buying crap off Kijiji money. Oh, also, last note here, just because it's hilarious.
Plywood is only slightly thicker than the human skull.
This isn't a flaw in the plan, it's just a really dumb line, one that they were so proud of that they made sure to include in the title cards. You're shooting .30 caliber frangible bullets. His skull isn't going to be the problem here.
Because it's better for my psychosocial development for me to interact with a peer group at a normal school environment.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want it to be a precocious kid who had a bunch of facts in his head. It wasn't really that role, and I felt like, to me, it was a little bit more about emotional intelligence than it was IQ for this kid.
That is a mind-boggling statement that just says so much about the way Colin Trevorrow sees the world. Henry is the least emotionally aware person in the film. He's actually a huge prick. I mean, his first real scene is him dunking on this kid Tommy for not being grown up enough for Henry's tastes.
I want to be remembered as the awesomest dodgeball player ever.
Dodgeball isn't even an Olympic sport.
Rather than being a kid who was being unfairly forced to grow up by a negligent, absent, or addicted parent, Henry has self-appointed himself to be the adult. This is tied to the movie's characterization of Susan, which we'll get to shortly, but there's no indication that things wouldn't get done without Henry around. Henry is the kind of person who self-martyrs because they see other people as incompetent. The film also tries to play Henry two ways and can't decide which is which. Susan tells him to spend less time focused on his schoolwork, and there's a whole half a scene about all the awards that Henry wins for extracurricular activities. So, on one hand, we're supposed to think about Henry as the kind of keener who does all the bonus work and then some. But then in that first scene, the Tyler Durden Jr. speech, Henry is supposed to be reading an essay that he's written, except he's clearly just improvising. He didn't do the work at all. So there's the other implication, that he's a waster, the smart kid who thinks the work is beneath him. And to cap it off, he mocks his teacher.
Remind me again why we can't put you in a gifted school.
Because it's better for my psychosocial development for me to interact with a peer group at a normal school environment.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this whole moment is demonstrably false. Every shot of him in class, he looks absurdly bored, and he doesn't have any friends. Henry spends his lunch playing checkers in the cafeteria with the lunch lady, a scene where he does the whole movie smart person shorthand of beating the game in one move just to show that he was in control all along, which is, again, a huge dick move. It's also incredibly hack on the part of the screenwriter. Like, this is just the worst kind of lazy trope. Oh, and we can't forget the scene where Henry, cop on the edge, bursts into goddammit Janice's office and threatens to turn in his badge.
God damn it, Janice, how much longer does this have to go on? What else do you need to see?
Henry also gets really judgy about Susan playing video games. He mocks the way that she plays and polices what she does with her free time. He's actually really condescending to Susan. Constantly.
I really wish you get a new car. It's not like you can't afford it or
You should really read it, know what it says. No, it doesn't actually help when you lean into it like that. It was well told.
Hey!
Mom, I told you, you don't have to work anymore. Show me what I just taught you.
I'm not a child, Henry.
Show me.
Stop that. It's really great how you enable her alcoholism. Violence isn't the worst thing in the world.
Jesus, Mom, really? Turn it off.
Oh, I was thinking when we get out of here.
Mom, I need you to bring in the financial files.
Oh, don't you worry about
They're in the
it.
second file drawer in my cabinet.
Not now.
I also need to get a hold of the retirement.
Listening to me?
What?
You need to buy a new car already. Mom, this is really important.
No, it's not important at all.
Keep an eye on the tech stocks. You have to watch them closer than the others.
Deleted last month. I'm not doing that right.
What? No, she's not. Now, the middle finger is a gesture with a high degree of plasticity. You have your classic style, Detroit style, the web shooters, and, of course, the Logan. There is nothing wrong with her form. You're not being accurate. You're just being a dick, and you deserve to get flipped off. Oh, and of course, how can we forget the part where Henry cooks up a plot to murder his neighbor?
To me, it was a little bit more about emotional intelligence than it was IQ.
You have to ask your 11-year-old?
12. He's almost 12.
How the film characterizes Susan is, for me at least, the weirdest part of the way the movie is constructed. All of the previous stuff about the way that Henry interacts with her, there's a dissonance in that the movie still seems to think that Henry is always correct. He's an asshole genius as directed by someone who doesn't think that he's an asshole. The byproduct of this is that every time Henry is a judgy prick to his mom, the framing and consequences always skew towards Henry.
Jesus, Mom, really?
Even in the big deathbed argument where Henry tells Susan to focus on the finances and Susan says it doesn't matter, this isn't ultimately framed as Henry's failure, his fear in the face of mortality, but instead as Susan's weakness. Within the framework of the story, this isn't Henry in denial, it's Henry trying to tie up loose ends because he's the adult in the relationship.
Mom, this is really important.
No, it's not important at all.
Keep an eye on the tech stocks. You have to watch them close.
Henry's plans and behavior never actually fail or fall apart. The closest it gets is when Susan decides not to shoot Glenn, but nothing actually comes from that because Glenn kills himself a few minutes later. This moment right here where Susan goes off script, this is where the story finally picks up, where the stakes are raised, but then it just ends and everything goes according to Henry's plan with no fallout whatsoever. So this creates a dynamic where the film is constantly suggesting things about Susan that aren't actually true if you think about it for more than a minute. From a structural standpoint, the main problem with Susan is that she has no arc as a character because none of her real problems are addressed, and the problem that is addressed was never truly a problem. Susan's deal is that she's complacent. She's comfortable, she's safe, she's financially secure, and she's just kind of coasting through life, raising her 2 kids, enjoying being in a place where nothing requires her constant, unbroken attention. She has plenty of time to bond with her kids, drive them to and from school, take them to events, make them breakfast, and pack their lunches. Now, she does have a bad case of cool mom.
Mrs. Carpenter.
Sweetie, please. Susan?
She's overly codependent on Henry, and she has no real ambitions, but the family is, objectively, doing all right. She's not super keyed into the family finances because she doesn't need to be. That's the luxury of being well off, regardless of Henry's involvement. This goes back to everything we talked about with the money subplot. Susan ostensibly doesn't know about all the money that Henry has made on the stock market, but it doesn't seem to bother Susan at all. As far as she's concerned, the family is financially secure off whatever income she has, and nothing suggests that if it weren't for Henry, they'd be screwed. I mean, presumably they survived just fine before Henry started trading stocks, right? Being a cool mom is a character flaw in the absolute sense, but there's no stakes to it in and of itself. Cool mom is a surface level problem, a behavioral problem that makes other problems worse. Being a cool mom didn't lead to Henry's rapid onset terminal brain cancer being overlooked. It's only kind of a problem for one scene after Henry's death where she has a very justifiable but temporary breakdown. Nothing that goes wrong in the second half of the movie has anything to do with the things she was failing to do when Henry was alive, things that Henry was doing that she, the parent, should have been doing instead. The thing that the movie chooses to use as synecdoche for Susan's negligence is that she plays video games and has one girl's night with Sheila. But none of this is ever at the cost of anything. She's not playing games instead of getting groceries or making breakfast. She's not playing games instead of going to work, which would still be pointless since the movie has explicitly told us that she doesn't need to go to work in the first place. She's not drinking instead of helping with homework or getting drunk in the middle of the day or inviting Sheila over 6 nights a week. She's just playing video games sometimes. Yeah, the movie is super judgmental about Susan not spending literally 100% of her time focused on her kids.
Turn it off.
So as a character arc, she kind of learns at the very end to see her genius dead kid as the kid he was and not the small adult he acted like. But he's already dead, so it's not like that changes anything. Aside from that, she's just kind of complacent. Her subplot about wanting to be a picture book author is, well, it's disingenuous to even call it a subplot. It's not Susan's ambition so much as it's the one of her 3 hobbies that the movie approves of.
And your father's lucky to have you too.
Stepfather.
Alright, this one is the heavy one. Christina's involvement in the film is a textbook example of a prop character. You could replace her with just about anything and the plot would still work. She could be a sack of jewels that Glenn has stolen, and very little would actually change. The plot to kill Glenn is supposedly motivated by the desire to save Christina from abuse, but Christina isn't involved in it at all. Her agency in all of this is utterly absent, and this is why it's really just a plot to kill Glenn, not a plot to save Christina. The whole story started from the idea of a genius kid planning the perfect crime, and the dudes who made it were so busy high-fiving each other for their wit that they didn't bother to ask if a story about an 11-year-old being raped by her stepdad was the best vehicle for that.
The tonal tightrope walk of this movie is a deeply challenging one, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to be involved. And it breaks, I think, pretty much all the rules of screenwriting. Like, if you look at the books that they give you in college, at least the first 3 chapters, just rip them out.
One of the things that was a challenge was managing the tone.
Oh, Jesus, they think they nailed it. Anyway, Christina only has a half-dozen lines in the entire movie, and no one bothers to even try and empower her, only taking the time to make a few anonymous phone calls before giving up entirely. Yet, we're expected to believe that she's so close with the Carpenter family that she has fancy personal handshakes with Susan and slots effortlessly into the whole Henry left behind.
Good night, butterfly.
From a storytelling standpoint, there's a whole host of problems with how this entire plot unfolds. We, the audience, first get the inkling that something's wrong when Henry notices that Christina is sad on the playground. That night, by happenstance, Henry is looking out his bedroom window when he sees, presumably, Christina being abused by Glenn. Now, from our perspective, this is the inciting moment. Henry has discovered a crime and is now going to start trying to correct it. The next morning, he tries lightly to prod Christina in the car, and then in class, when she isn't interested in a donut, he gets up, storms into the principal's office, and...
God damn it, Janice, how much longer does this have to go on?
This is complete whiplash. We're 20 minutes into the movie, and all of a sudden, this isn't something new. This is now an ongoing thing that he's tried to report before. He's dumping all this new information that contradicts what we were just told. Everything about the framing, music, and acting in the previous scenes indicates that this is new, not some long-running thing that Henry has been dealing with. In the first scene with all the key players, nothing about this plot is indicated beyond the fact that the kids don't particularly like Glenn. Also, in one of the weirdest creative decisions, even though Henry says she's been coming to school with bruises, the hacks that went with this visual shorthand decided that they weren't going to go with a visible bruise. It's weird. Why wouldn't you show us that? It's the easiest thing to show. And then, goddammit, Janice says she needs concrete proof, but bruises weren't enough, I guess? All of this repeats again at the end when Susan makes all of the same claims, that she apparently has all this information stashed away, but we've never seen any of it, which is just asinine in a story that's literally focused on planning and details. We have the process Henry used to partially forge custody papers, but zilch about gathering actual evidence against Glenn.
Henry documented all of it.
The movie has this really weird aversion to making any of the characters actually flawed or negligent in some way. If the filmmakers gave Christina visible bruises that they show us, well, suddenly every character who can see those bruises, including Susan, teachers, and goddammit Janice, are accountable. Their failure to react or willingness to overlook that information is damning and makes them complicit in Glenn's abuse. So the movie goes to weird lengths to give everyone an out. No one makes actual awful mistakes, they just make implied mistakes. I mean, that's why they're even doing this flimsy due diligence in the first place. It's all just shoddy convenience so that Henry can be blameless when he decides to plan to kill Glenn. Make it look like there was no other option, instead of implying that maybe Henry was actually just a little too eager to kill Mr. Sickleman next door.
I want to be remembered as the awesomest dodgeball player ever.
Easily one of the strangest elements of the movie is the weird mangled Jesus metaphor. First of all, the movie is called The Book of Henry, an aesthetic call to the naming of biblical books. The Book of Matthew, the Book of John, the Book of Jeremiah, Job, Ezra, Ezekiel, Mark, Luke, Esther, Ruth, Malachi. Second, Henry's death is an aesthetic call to pietist sculpture, the thinking man's Jesus imagery for when a crucifixion pose would be too crass. Third, Henry's number one disciple, the one who first takes his words and convinces others of their importance, is named Peter. Fourth, the family name is Carpenter, which is only about one step down from when Lost had a metaphysical guide named Christian Shepherd. Fifth, at the very end, Susan reads her new story about how a flower dies and fertilizes a garden with its body, which is just a muddy repaint of the Christian belief that Jesus died to exalt mankind, but is also clearly intended as a metaphor for Henry, who died but made things better in the process. Okay, so the movie thinks that its message is about apathy.
Violence isn't the worst thing in the world.
What is then?
Apathy.
So the takeaway here is that the death of Henry is what taught Susan to be less apathetic and to reach out and help others, that she went from being unwilling to intervene in the grocery store to willing to kill Glenn and forge documents in order to save Christina. But she didn't kill Glenn, and in fact, once she learns about Christina's situation, especially once she sees it for herself, she's anything but apathetic. Sure, the things that she tries are largely ineffective, and she quickly latches onto the murder plot, but she doesn't need any persuading to care. Even in the grocery store, the problem isn't apathy, it's feeling powerless. She's worried that if she intervenes, it will make things worse. This is not the moral failing she actually overcomes. It's never even implied that killing Glenn might have unforeseen negative outcomes. Oh, and if you want an actual example of a bad Deus Ex Machina ending, it would be when Principal Goddammit Janice decides, completely independently of the actions of any of the characters, to finally do her job in a way that neatly resolves all conflicts while absolving the central characters for any of their actions. Susan gets away with attempted murder because Glenn kills himself before he can tell anyone what she did.
For my magic trick, I'm going to make my brother reappear.
There's so much more that we could talk about, but to wrap this up, I want to talk about one scene in particular. My favorite scene in the whole movie for how utterly absurd it is at every level of conception. For Peter's act in the talent show, he pushes out a large chest and says that he will make his brother Henry reappear.
I'm done. He's gonna be here, right among all of us.
Now, there's a critical detail from earlier that needs to be mentioned. After Henry's death, there's no funeral scene, not even in montage. This is important because this moment with Peter on stage is supposed to create some uncertainty. Did Henry, genius child and Jesus metaphor, in fact fake his own death and will now pop out to the delight of all? Who knows? So Peter opens the chest, kicks it, and it starts spraying fake snow out over the audience. Just everywhere. Just everywhere. Then everyone gets up, standing ovation, Peter and Susan hug. So, this scene. All right. What's going on here? What they're trying to do. This is obviously a callback to the mountain climbing nonsense from earlier, which no one in the crowd would be familiar with. So this is literally just a chest that spits out fake snow. Metaphorically, this is the Book of Henry's version of the baptism of fire inside its mangled Jesus metaphor. Peter, chief apostle, has preached to the crowd the whimsy of Henry, and his spirit has descended upon them. But you know what else it means, visually? It means that Peter has promised the crowd that his brother Henry would be physically right here among them. And then he sprays them with a dry, white powder. The visual implication, however unintended, is that Peter scatters Henry's ashes over the crowd. Standing ovation.